I know conference can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and the weekend can bring a lot of different emotions. So, well, we're rolling on YouTube, but it's not with video. So if you're on YouTube, hi, we're glad you're here. Sorry, it's just audio, but enjoy the conversation. Pretend it's a podcast you're listening to. Right? Is that red I see? I love it. I don't know. I have a blue shirt on, but thank you. um, so, initial thoughts. I am always so excited about General Conference, and actually probably not for the reasons that some people are thinking. And if you had a hard conference, I 100% want to validate that as well, because there was a lot of stuff here that can absolutely be difficult. And my hope is to potentially give you some alternative perspectives of how to think about things, how to view things, just to add to your kind of processing. And if you haven't yet, make sure you sign up. The link is in my bio to come to the General Conference after party tomorrow night on Zoom. It is always so much fun. We just gather together as a bunch of ladies and talk in person. And we have people who, again, have watched some, all, none of conference, and we ask questions, we share ideas, we talk about the good stuff, we talk about the hard stuff. It's just like hanging out with your friends and talking about conference, right? Kind of like book club. Right? Which, on that note, I am going to be doing specific responses to a few of the bigger talks that there's a variety of opinions and thoughts around on this week. So make sure you're watching, looking out for those. We'll be doing more lives and things. But I am also starting a Facebook group. And I've done this before. We did like a General Conference book club sort of thing, where there was a single talk and we focused on it all month long. I start moving through the talks a little bit faster, because if you only do one talk once a month, there's not as many that you can get through. So this time around, we're going to be studying a different talk every week. And I promise you, this is not like how you've ever studied them before. This is not like a regular, okay, what's the important message? How do I apply this to my life? This is an exercise. It's a spiritual exercise in learning to take a text that you can have any varying degree of belief, agreement in, and learning to utilize it as a tool to help you connect with your own personal connection with God, Spirit, the divine, to seek guidance out of it. Right? I do this all the time. There are books that speak to me. There are movies that speak to me. There are sacred texts of other religions that speak to me, right? And so looking at this from that more general spiritual perspective and learning how to intentionally utilize that skill so that you can take any piece of text, any object, any experience in your life, and learn how to use it as a tool to connect you with the divine. Right? It's kind of my favorite way of viewing the idea that all things testify of Christ. Right? We once had an activity in my seminary class. Gosh, I think it was in junior high, and our teacher had us pick a random object in the room and then had to tell us how it related to Christ. Right? It's kind of a similar activity to that, but it is focused on the core tenets of proper spiritual development, which is also something we're going to be talking about all this week long, because I think it is one of the missing links, and is kind of where a lot of my thoughts have been around conference today, is recognizing that regardless of what your religion, belief, faith, creed, culture is, spiritual development is something that is fundamental to all of us. In fact, one of the talks even kind of was talking about this idea, and I got so excited. It always makes me laugh, because I feel like whatever I am studying or working on or doing in my own life, more and more, like, conference will come out and be talking about the same things. So for me personally, it's a really fun experience to be able to see a lot of those parallels. So one of the talks, and I apologize, I do not have good notes with me right now of who said what. So you're going to be a lot of somebody said, and at one point somebody said this, right? So don't quote me on anything here because it's totally happened before where I'm like, oh, and somebody said this and this and this. And I go to look back and it's like, I swear they said those words and they did not, right? It was my own personal message that was coming through during that time. But regardless, I think it's fun to share those experiences. I love hearing other people's spiritual experiences. What are the thoughts you had? How do you interact as a spiritual being having human experiences in your day-to-day life, right? I love hearing those. And in fact, I have several fun people lined up this week that we're going to be hearing their stories and answering this key question, which I keep going towards and then getting on a tangent and then going towards and then getting on a tangent. So we're just embracing a little bit of that ADHD tendencies coming in here. But the point I wanted to say is proper spiritual development is this idea that we are a body and a spirit, a human and a spiritual divine being, right? There are these two parts of who we are, and they have a relationship with each other, and we need to understand what that relationship is. And they also have their own needs to be healthy and cultivate a state of well-being. And if we're only doing one or the other, then the relationship is going to be off, right? And so understanding the idea that every culture, religion, people has their own practices and ways of understanding what does it mean to have proper spiritual development? What does that look like? How do we help support it? How do we foster that? And I've been creating this beautiful framework to help us understand what is the standardization, a metric that can be used across any spiritual or religious practice to identify what is helping foster that proper spiritual development and what could be impeding it or getting in the way. Because it gives us a way to assess the different challenges, the different struggles that we experience in our spiritual lives and religious experiences that has more of a foundational footing, right? It's not just, I don't agree with this, or I don't think this is the right way. It is much more like, this is standardization for proper mental health, right? Regardless of the different methodologies that a different counselor or therapist might specialize in or utilize, there are some fundamental principles and practices that they need to understand, and certain things that follow their responsibility and code of ethics. Likewise, there is a similar standardization we can understand for spiritual development, and starting to put some language and some understanding around that. That's what we're going to be doing all week long. So if you're interested in that idea or any of these things, that's a little sneak peek of what we've got happening this week. So the conference party is just getting started around here. We were prepping for it last week, and we're going to be really diving into making it personal. How do you navigate in relationships? How do you deal with differences of opinions or experiences, right? So it's going to be good stuff. But a few of the other things that I want to touch on, one of my favorite practices in regards to conference is picking a single word that I feel like describes or encompasses the whole sort of overall message or experience. And I'd love to hear anyone who wants to share their word in the comments. You are more than welcome to. Because I feel like every year or twice a year, right? There really are these patterns or themes that show up. And I am such a pattern person. I just love seeing the world through this lens of patterns, right? And I think you could probably say Jesus Christ was a little bit more of a pattern this year, which was really fun to see some focus and centering on that. I think another word that could be coming up is this idea of love or cooperation, or the need to not have discord among us, right? Kind of few talks centered around that. But for me, the word that just stood out blaring so much is one that I don't think I ever would have expected in the past to say, nor would I have thought it would be so meaningful, so pertinent, so hopeful, so inspiring of a word. And yet I could not help but just see it everywhere throughout the session. And the word is death. Right? And I understand that we were talking about Easter a lot this week, and so there are a lot of stories that were referring to, that last week of Christ's life and all that it entailed. And so there's a natural, place there for death to kind of come up. But in the past, when April Conference has been around Easter, usually I feel like the emphasis is more on the atonement or the resurrection. And in this case, we even had a story about Lazarus. We had just so many different references to death. And the reason why I think this is so important and so interesting to note is because one of the patterns that has become my absolute favorite and the foundation of how I view my life, how I view life in general, right, is through this pattern of birth, life, death, rebirth. Right? It's the foundation of everything that I teach, of how I view and experience and live my life, right, is through that lens of seeing that pattern show up. And usually we're kind of familiar with the idea of like birth. Yeah, I'm like stepping into a new experience in my life or a new relationship or a new way of being. And then the life part of like, okay, this is like feeling normal and I'm rolling with things and it's fun. And this is what's happening right now, right? But death, that third stage, is one that we struggle with. And I feel like we really misunderstand. And I feel like I've been guided and tutored a lot more in really understanding what death is all about. And the more I study it, the more I am in love with the idea of death, right? Rebirth is usually like the one we emphasize and are so excited. And it's usually because we view death as like the thing that went wrong in our lives, or like the failure or the shortcoming or the bad thing that happened. And it's okay because there's rebirth afterwards, right? There's going to be this process of it's going to be okay afterwards. The sun is going to come out tomorrow, right? That sort of mentality. But death is just becoming like such a beautiful part of my spirituality in general, because death is no longer this sign or symbol of something has gone wrong, or of my feelings, or of things that have to be inherently difficult or painful, right? Death has become instead this beautiful representation of the goal, right? This actually came from one of my students in my current program. We were talking about death, and this beautiful piece of wisdom came out of her mouth. And I am not surprised at all, because she specializes in spiritual birth. And when we are giving, and by that I mean the process of physically birthing a child and the spiritual nature and like energetic understanding around it. And when you as a woman are birthing a child, who you were dies, right? And death is a very intimate part of the experience. You have to become willing to acknowledge that there is, like, when it comes to physical death, you are kind of looking it in the face, right? It is confronting you in a way that you might not have ever previously experienced. And having to be okay and try to relax and trust and allow the process to unfold regardless. And then there's that spiritual death part of it, which is you will never be the same person you were again, right? The act of going through that process, the old you dies. And when that child is born, a new mother is born as well, is a new version of you. And this is just such a beautiful example to me of, again, this whole process of birth, life, death, rebirth. And so even when we may not personally be experiencing what it is to give birth to a child, still understanding that process and that pattern because it plays out in our lives all the time. Right? And so realizing that death is the goal. We always focus on birth, right? Because birth is kind of the fun, exciting. It's like, oh, okay. But death, guys, is the goal because death is the indicator that everything we have been working for, everything that has internally been growing and developing and getting added to is about to be manifest in our lives, right? It's about to show physically, tangibly in ways we didn't previously understand or realize. Death is the beautiful transition. It is transformative, right? It is that process of the caterpillar dying and becoming a butterfly. Right? It is so beautiful and so sacred in that regard. Right? And I feel like throughout this conference, there was this theme of death and the millennium and that process of this transformation taking place. Right? And I think this is such an important one to be discussing because I think a lot of members right now are feeling that sensation of death, right? And it's part of what makes things really difficult for people right now is what does that mean, right? To sense and feel like the church is dying, right? I know I've had many conversations with people talking with me who have said, it feels like there is just this wedge happening and this divide is just getting bigger and bigger. And that at some point, like the church is just going to snap and split, right? And from an energetic perspective, yes, that is one possibility. Things can play out that way, but it doesn't have to play out that way, right? There is another option that is equally as available and so much more enjoyable and beautiful. Right? And it involves the understanding that we are going through this death process. Right? One of my favorite ways to think about this and understand this idea of death is looking at relationships, right? Whether it's dating or in a marriage, you go through this birth, life, death, rebirth experience where birth is sort of like, it's new, it's exciting, you're wondering where it's going to go, you're so in love, everything is so wonderful. And then life is like, okay, you've kind of got a rhythm and you know your person and this is how you show up and you regularly interact and you enjoy each other's company and there's some bumps, but for the most part, things are pretty good. And then comes that death, right? And it's like, oh no, everything is falling apart, right? The first big fight or that experience of, whoa, you are turning into somebody, I don't know that I recognize you anymore. And I'm not sure how to navigate that. I know a lot of couples right now are experiencing some sort of this experience where it's like, the things that we used to connect on, the things that used to be that foundation of our relationship are shifting. And what does that mean for the survival of the relationship? Does that mean we have to kind of go backwards and try and find that solid ground we had before and stop all of the shifting that is occurring? To which I say, energetically speaking, you can't go backwards. We live in an expansion-based universe. Right? So whether you want to look at that physically through the literal universe that is perpetually expanding at this perfect rate, right? Or if you want to view that more through the energetic perspective, that everything is continuing to just expand, right? And so when we look at something from this lens, it's like, this is all there is. This is what is true. This is what's accessible. This is what we can see. This is how we can understand, move, and navigate through the world, whether that's for an individual or for a system. Right? And because of that natural expansion process, in time, we realize like, oh, that wasn't all. Like there's more. And thinking that this is all there was actually makes it look like a lot of things were wrong. Because, oh, no, this is what we're supposed to be doing. Oh, no, this is what we're supposed to be doing. Oh, no, this is what we're supposed to be doing. Oh, no, this is what we're supposed to be doing, right? And when we're perpetually viewing it as we're falling short, right? And look, we didn't do this right. We didn't do that right. We didn't do that right. Instead of viewing it as that wasn't accessible or wasn't available to us, right? Somebody in the dark ages was looking at how we're communicating and experiencing things right now. I'd be like, I don't even know how to comprehend what is happening right now, right? I am talking to people who I've never met in person. We're not seeing each other. There's just like a little icon picture of you that gives me a representation of who you are and that you're potentially listening to this. And the other people that might be watching the replay that I'm not even going to know are watching, right? And yet we're interacting in this way, right? That's going to feel like magic. And we could be sitting there and being like, you guys in the dark ages were doing it wrong. Like, you should have been able to be connecting with other people and other stuff that's happening. And from my view, it's just like, no, that wasn't available to them. It wasn't accessible to them, right? Maybe that was the ultimate goal. Maybe that was the purpose. Maybe that was the right direction things were to be headed in. But to look backwards at what people were doing and to try to say, no, right? You should have been doing this. Maybe it was accessible, and maybe that is something to be thinking about, but it's to be putting it in the lens of our current position and our current trajectory moving forward, right? Do we like what was going on before and want to continue to have more of that expanding, right? Or are we looking backwards and going, you know what? There's some stuff here. I think we could do better, right? I think there's a better way we could go about this. Let's make some shifts so that what we're expanding into is something that aligns better with who we are becoming, where we are going, who we are turning into, right? And to really recognize and play into that more, right? And so it's that same idea of we have to have these deaths that occur in our lives and in our thoughts where we are letting go of those things that we used to be, we used to do, we used to view the world, we used to focus on, because that's not who we are becoming. That's not what we are expanding into. That's not the only thing that's available and accessible to us now. And if we're holding on to that too much, we're going to miss out on what is continuing to unfold at this point, right? So in my personal life, there's been times where my husband and I have had to basically be like, and this relationship is over. Like, how we used to interact, the patterns of our communication, the way we would, do things together, like, that relationship has died. And this is a fresh, new relationship, and we need to learn how to understand each other. We need to learn a new way of working together. We need to find a new way of communicating together, because we become different people, and the relationship needs to be able to reflect that. And when we kept holding on to seeing the person as the way they were in the old relationship, it prevented us from being able to figure out ways to get along and cooperate in the new version of the relationship. Right? Now, sometimes when that death process happens, it does mean the physical end of the relationship, right? There's a breakup, there's a divorce, there's a separation, there's something that occurs there, right? But that doesn't have to be the only option, right? Again, that relationship between me and my husband ended and a new one between us started. And then after a period of time, that one ended and a new one started, right? The motto that we've been repeating recently is we're calibrating to a new version of our relationship right now in these last couple of months has been all of your instincts about me are wrong, because our instincts, our natural reactions, expectations, even biological programming are still focused on the old relationship and the old version of who we are. And it's like putting on blinders. We're not able to see what's actually happening or what's actually going on in the relationship, because we think we're interacting with this other version of a person, and it's not who they are in the relationship anymore, right? They've changed, but we're still putting this projection on them of this is who you are, and so this is how I'm going to interact with you, and this is what's going on. And we're not really seeing who the person is or where they're coming from or what's happening here. And so that reminder to be like, okay, I'm learning a new way to interact with you. I'm going to set aside all of those instincts and I'm going to start practicing and programming the things I want for the new relationship going forward. Okay? And this process is, again, it's something we see show up in the parent-child relationship. Right? As the child grows, how that relationship and connection and bonding and responsibility and caretaking, what that looks like, it changes. And if we're still holding on to, well, this was how they were before, or this is what's going on right now, we miss opportunities to actually connect with them in the current version of the relationship. Right? We were talking about this last week in my group program, and we had one gal share a story of her, 20-something-year-old son who loves snowboarding and is like the whole snowboarder look. He's got kind of like the longer hair, whatever. And she's like, he was my pretty one. Like, he was so handsome, and I wanted him to look a certain way. And I've had to let that die, to realize and to kind of mourn and grieve that experience of that thing is dying. And in that process, it allowed her the space to be able to see her son and to be in a relationship with him as he is now, rather than this ideal version she was viewing of who she wanted him to be. And this same sort of experience is one that we go through with our own parents, realizing they're not perfect as we get older. And it's also something that I think is occurring for a lot of people in their faith journey, right? There's this natural development, this spiritual development process that we move through. And it's so much more than just maturing. It is also this recognizing how things were, how I used to view things, how I used to relate and connect and find spiritual meaning and purpose and connection is not the same anymore. And having to go through a process of mourning that, and then going through the process of what I always go back to, like my professional organizer days, where if you wanted to transform a space, right, you had to kind of pull everything out of the junk drawer, right, and sort through it and get really up close and personal and say, what is it that you like and you want to keep? What is it you don't like and you want to get rid of? And to go through this process of sorting and sifting through things. And that's important, not because we want to get focused on all the stuff that doesn't belong in the drawer. Right? We need to see it. We need to recognize it. We need to know that it doesn't belong in the drawer anymore so that we can get rid of it, right? But we can't get so consumed and focused on it that we miss the opportunities to say, well, this is what I do want. How do I start incorporating the things that I do want better into my life? How am I going to organize them? Where do I want to keep them? How am I going to set that up? What does it look like for me to interact with that in a day-to-day life? And it's part of that place that I see a lot of people get kind of stuck in their spiritual journey is, okay, so maybe they're realizing this stuff is occurring. They're going through the mourning process. They're doing the sifting and sorting. They know what they don't want, but they're not talking as much about what they do want. Now, this conference, it was really fun because a lot of the different accounts that I follow, I started seeing more of the things of what I do want, right? I want more fun music was one of the things I saw. I saw another one that was like, ooh, could this be like a regular conference where there's like breakout sessions and it's all pre-recorded and you can attend whatever ones you want to based on the topic that feels most applicable to you. And for me, one of the ideas was like, I wanted to have that feeling like the wonderful good parts of the Olympics. That idea of like the whole world coming together for a period of time and feeling like we are here to just celebrate life and celebrate the very essence of personal and collective growth and achievement and development and working for something and supporting each other and caring about one another and seeing the value and the goodness and recognizing the differences and enjoying those, right? Now, all of those feelings and messages aren't always there in every Olympics, right? There's a lot of things that shift and go through, but that feeling, that idea of like, I want, I don't know, the best human family reunion experience you could have, where it's like, oh man, I never see those cousins ever. And it's so wild to see them here. And whoa, their life is so different from mine, but how cool is that to see and experience it? And yes, you belong as a part of this family, right? And that, I think, is one of the key pieces, is being able to kind of juggle this balance between the contrast coming up, the things you don't want showing up, to say, what is it you do want, right? Because that's kind of the whole point of the expansion process, is to say, this is what I don't want, and it's pointing me to what I do want, right? And then we go through kind of that, again, death experience of letting all of this die and move away and stepping into what is it we want to be experiencing moving forward, right? And so viewing it as seeing there was a lot of contrast that showed up in a lot of ways for a lot of people, right? And those contrasting moments, the things that were difficult, that were challenging for you, right? That's that coming up to be like, hey, this is what we don't want. What is it that we do want, right? And from an energetic place, this is so important, because what we do want is being able to focus on that energy becoming dominant, right? It's the same idea I was describing with a relationship with my husband, right? If I'm still focused on who he was, how we used to interact, the things that used to bother me, I'm missing out on the opportunity to start creating and embodying this experience in my life, right? Now, it may not be available and accessible yet for that to fully show up physically in our life, but I can start emotionally, mentally, energetically calibrating to and creating that. And the more that I do, it starts becoming a part of who I am, a part of my life. And then it starts showing up, and that starts making it more tangible and real in the world. And we often sometimes get focused that change in organizations comes from the top down, right? We're going to be talking all about hierarchy and heterarchy this week too. So we'll save that conversation for another day. And that is like a real thing, right? The things come down. But the way it is supposed to be happening is that what comes down comes as a result of what comes up, right? We tend to view it as like, here's an individual, and we know how an individual and an individual have a relationship together, how they communicate, how they work things out. They get equal, they're supposed to be able to have equal contribution into, that dynamic of what do they want to be experiencing? How are they wanting to be in that relationship together? When it comes to an individual and a system having a relationship together, it becomes sometimes in this more lopsided view where it's like, I'm just an individual having this relationship experience with this system. I can't change anything. The system has all the power. When in reality, that's not actually the case. It's a collection of lots of individuals and lots of individuals, and the variety of so many different relationships that intercross between those, right? So the more you are practicing and being and focusing and living that expression of the things that you do want in your day-to-day life, it's having these little ripple effects in all the little relationships. And I promise you those are happening in the system as well, and that there's cross mingling that is occurring. Right? And so when this part of the process is happening, we're not seeing it on the big system level as much. Right? Where we do start to see it more and more is in that, again, individual experience. So having those conversations with your friends, with your family, with your ward, with whatever circles you're in, right? That's part of this we're figuring out, what does that look like? How does it come through? And when it comes through in this level of the relationship, that's when it's going to start looking different. And that's when we know things are starting to shift here. Right? And there's a lot of things that I feel like were showing up as indicators that this death process is happening. Right? And some of those signs of that death process occurring come back to those fundamentals of birth. And so if we look at the labor process, when it comes time for a woman to deliver her child, she hits a period called transition. Right? And this is often described as one of the most difficult, painful parts of the whole birth experience. But it is also when she's getting really close, right? Knowing that you may have been in the labor now for over 24 hours and wondering, when is this going to end? Right? And to be able to recognize and say, it's coming, right? We're getting closer. Right? And so when she hits transition, a few things happen. One, she has to leave behind anything that's not coming with her into that birth and beyond, right? Because she's entering that space of transition. She has to start shutting out the world. And in fact, there's a lot of cool research that's coming out of showing how this physiologically is wired to happen, where it's like you're not paying attention to what's going on around you. Kind of up until this point, even while you're laboring, you can still sort of be interacting and aware and like what's going on. But when that time comes, it's like everything gets filtered out, tuned out, because she's moving through this portal process, right? And we see that starting to show up and play out. Of a lot of stuff is coming up on the individual level, on the family level, on the system level, of asking, what is it that we need to be leaving behind that shouldn't be coming with us into this next expanded version of who we are becoming? Okay? The second thing is that both the mother and the baby are repeatedly squeezed and contracted as a form of progression and purification that is preparatory to this final eventual moment of birth, right? And so we're seeing this kind of birth death process happening right now across our world at large, right? It's not just showing up in individual lives, in your faith journeys, in families, within the church. It's showing up in government and politics. It's showing up in healthcare. It's showing up in education. Pick a part of the human experience, and we're all kind of going through this labor process. There are these contractions and expansions that are happening. And when we hit those contractions, they're kind of rough, right? And we're having to learn a new way of being, right? When you're not pregnant, the way you move your body and interact with the world and things is one way. When you become pregnant, it starts to shift and change how you are moving and experiencing. And when you start entering labor, it changes on a whole new scale, right? And so part of what we're having to learn right now as a human collective is how to find a new center point, a new sense of grounding when the external is just constantly in this state of perpetual fluctuation, right? It used to be that the external was fairly, consistent. We had our ups and downs and things that happened, and life was life, but it was fairly stable, and it was more our internal journey through that process that was variable, right? And recognizing as that starts shifting, that internal place is where you have to find that centeredness, that connection that is going to be able to get you through breathing through those contractions and those experiences that are happening. So when you see evidence of the divide and the coming together, and the divide and the coming together, and the divide and the coming together, right? We tend to get caught up in one experience or the other, right? That either the divide is going to be here forever and it's like, oh no, things are really bad, right? Or we want to be like, okay, we've come together, now let's just stay here. But energetically, if you just stay here, you're not moving, you're not expanding, you're not keeping up with the heartbeat, the pulse, the rhythm of life, right? That is going to be moving you forward, and you're just going to be resisting it, and it's going to be uncomfortable. There's supposed to be this inevitable exploration of, okay, well, what are now the new possibilities? And let's come together. And now what are the new possibilities? And let's come together. And new possibilities and come together, right? This expansion and distillation, and expansion and distillation that happens, that creates that momentum like swimming, that propels us forward in new ways, right? So getting comfortable with that contraction expansion process, that perpetual change, is really, really important. How do you stay grounded and centered throughout it? And we're seeing that play out a whole bunch right now. And in fact, there's kind of this perspective. If we look at the history of the church as a whole, we had this birth moment of it, right? And it grew into this beautiful life, and it was like, oh, look at this thing, we're becoming this worldwide global church, and look at all the good that's happening and that we're doing and what's going on. And there's this desire, this tendency, it's very natural to say, okay, let's keep moving in that direction that we have been, because that's how we're going to expand and we're going to reach all of these goals and things that we want to accomplish and become. But if you're doing that, it actually gets really diffuse, and we lose a lot of that momentum, and things can just sort of like fall apart. They can crumble if you actually keep going in that place, even though it can feel like, well, that's the logical thing to be doing. And the energy is going to hit this point where it's starting to round the corners, and it's going to be trying to pull us back in to a new way of doing things. That's that impending death that is occurring. And if we're resisting the turn of that energy happening, we're fighting it and trying to like muscle and force our way to be like, no, we have to go this way. Because again, if we misunderstand death, we're going to think that that's occurring is something going wrong, not understanding it's actually part of that process. And so to me, it's really exciting to feel like we're living in a period of the church history where we've, again, had this birth, we've had this life, and we're coming into this death experience, right? That death experience excites me because it means real transformation, a new ability for the church as an entity, if you think of it like a person, to be who they truly are, right? There is so much in our doctrine, so much that is so good and so powerful that is not a part of who we are, right? It's there in this foundation, but it's been like the chick inside an egg, right? It's still kind of marinating and growing and developing, and it can be really easy to look and be like, oh my goodness, this shell is hollow and hard and empty and meaningless, and it is full of cracks and it is falling apart, right? And the more those cracks happen and become apparent and pieces start chipping off, right, that can become really scary if you think the egg is supposed to stay an egg forever. And if you don't understand that the egg is supposed to hatch, and the inside is the chick, is the full, alive expression, the whole point and purpose of the egg, right? It is this labor process that is coming forth. And so it gets really exciting to think of like, the egg is hatching, the shell is dying, it is cracking, and what is inside is that light, that goodness, that truth that we have been getting glimpses of, and we've been hoping and trusting is there, and we've been experiencing in some small ways in our lives, and it's about to come into a place of being able to experience it on a whole new level. And that I find so exciting. Okay? So again, looking at these symbols of labor as indicators of not everything is falling apart, not the world is ending in a bad way, right? It is ending in a wonderful way, in that the old is dying to make way for the new. And that it can be a hard and a scary process. And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know that I'm ready to be a mother. I don't know that I have enough clarity or experience, or if we're ready for this, or what's happening. But the only way you become capable and able to do that is you have to go through the birth process. You have to become a mother, and you have to learn on the job. You have to learn through experience, right? And so you can't get to that place of, I want to have the experience of being a mother and raising children and having these beautiful relationships and getting to experience grandchildren and whatever else, right? Without first, being willing to go through this process. Okay? So the third indicator here is looking physical death square in the eye and accepting the very real reality of it. I think this is one of the most difficult things for leaders in particular, right? Because part of the whole point of the leader of an organization is to make sure the organization doesn't fall apart, right? Like, you don't want to be the one where it's like the kingdom ended during your reign, right? Everything sort of fell apart. But having to recognize that, again, you are looking death in the eye, trusting in the process that this is not going to actually be the death that you fear it is. And in fact, if you resist it, you are far more likely to become a self-fulfilling prophecy that does lead to that falling, crumbling experience, right? Because we become too diffuse in things. It's not supported, it's not sustainable, it's not energetically stable. Okay? It's a very difficult one. And especially if you believe that there is this divine responsibility and role you have to make sure this doesn't fall apart, right? That's a lot of pressure to be under, a lot of weight to be trying to carry, trying to get it right, trying to navigate, trying to be willing to say, part of leadership too is all the people around you are pulling on you in lots of different ways, and having to learn, how do I stay centered in this place? How do I not get pulled one way or the other? Right? So that there's this sense of balance and stability within the organization. Right? And that tendency is a masculine one energetically. Those of you who haven't heard me talk about masculine and feminine energy before, it's not talking about gender or personality or sexuality or anything like that, right? They're just two different energetic states. They're like positive and negative charge, or north and south pole and a magnet, right? This idea that we have that masculine centeredness that is stable while we have all of these fluctuations going on within the system itself. Right? That's part of that leadership core bit. But because we, again, live in an expansion-based universe, that aligned, balanced masculine energy can eventually, if we're not aware of it, turns into this hyper masculine, overly masculine experience. And that's where we start to see things like control starting to come into play. And one of the fundamental parts of spiritual development, at the heart of it, is two tenets that every religion, practice, spiritual thing out there should have as its core piece, is helping people recognize that they are a spiritual being as well as a human being, and helping them to personally connect and have a relationship with God, the universe, the divine in their day-to-day lives, right? Those are the two tenets that you should always be coming back to, always pointing to, no matter what your methodology is for describing or explaining or saying this is the way you should be doing that. those should be your core tenets. And when we get into this overly masculine expression that, again, will naturally just occur out of the spiritual physics, right? That expansion-based experience, we need to become consciously aware of this so that we can recognize when it's happening and we can correct it back into an aligned state. Right? But again, there's that tendency to be like, oh, I need to keep doing what has been working, right? But the key piece is every time we go through this pattern here, we, in the expansion, it's something new, right? It's not what we were doing before. And when we get to the contraction, what used to be working is not working anymore because the energy is trying to pull us into a new way that's going to lead to this rebirth. And so if we're not following that rhythm, right, we're going to view that shift as things are going wrong, as things are falling apart, instead of being called to a new direction that is actually leading us to greater expansion, right? So when I'm working with my clients all the time, we'll be talking about, okay, if what was working is no longer working, that means you've energetically shifted and you have to learn a new way of being, right? Now, that new way of being doesn't have to be drastically different. It can mean you used to be in a state of being where it was easy for you to keep your kitchen and your house regularly cleaned. And now you are shifting into a different stage. And so that's no longer easily accessible for you to be doing right now. And it might be because you're going through an experience of processing a lot of stuff, right? And so your energy is being utilized in shedding these old layers of who you were, of working through a lot of emotion, of practicing new ways of being and showing up. And so that capacity isn't there in the same way. And just because it's gone doesn't mean it's not coming back, but it's a period to be like, you need to shift your priorities, right? So there's different stages in this process, and I have them all mapped out through this model I call the staircase model, which is really cool because it gives you this visual representation of how we go through this sort of expansion contraction process. And I will say to my different clients at different points of like, okay, you're in a stage right now where like we're lowering the bar way down. Like I'm talking, if you have kids, it's like screens and tablets and cereal for dinner and paper plates, because you're focusing on being a caterpillar in a chrysalis right now, and you need to move through that development so that you can show up, and you need to be conserving that energy so that when you do have some, you can be fully in and fully present as much as you can, giving those important touch points for them, right? We're not saying this is going to be forever, that this is always what's going on, and we're used to being okay with this idea if there's something externally going on in our lives causing it, right? So it's like, oh yeah, you're moving, or like it's tax season and you're an accountant, or like whatever the busy thing is that's going on. It's like, oh yeah, for this period I need to like way lower the bar on my expectations of how I'm operating in my life. But the truth is, it's not just for physical things going on in our life. It is also for the spiritual part of our development as well, that there are periods where we need to be understanding, hey, you're going through a transformative process right now. You need to be thinking about how you're living your life and the things you're prioritizing and how you're using your energy differently. And to recognize when you're in this state, we're doing things differently, and then we're going to move to the next one, and again, we're going to be doing things differently. Which is why if you've ever had that feeling in your life where it's like the moment you finally are like, okay, I feel like I found my rhythm. I know how to run my life. I've figured it all out, right? Things are good. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoop, things are no longer working anymore. That's again part of this pattern, right? And it's something that is so important for systems to be aware of, because it's not something that just happens on the individual level, it happens on the system level as well, right? And so, we see this pattern in business all the time. It's like well, here's what was working before in the business, and now things have changed. So we need to adjust the way that we do our marketing, and we need to adjust this thing, right? It's not a static, like, I found the one thing and I'm forever going to do it this way. There is this perpetual pulse to understanding what is the relationship that's going on between me and my market, and how am I interacting in that relationship, right? Being in relationship means being in a state of perpetual change. And the greatest problems in our relationships show up when we resist that pattern of change, right? And this is something that religion in particular has a really hard time with, is trying to understand, how do we have a core sense of identity, of belief, of practice, of culture, and still have space for this relationship that is founded on perpetual change, right? It's this dichotomy we're trying to figure out. And when people are confronted with that and see the disparity and see, hey, these two things aren't matching up, usually on the individual level, there's a tendency to want to be like, well, I'm going to just go figure out what I want to do. Like, I can't stay stuck in this place. I need to be able to have that pulse of life within me, right? And then on the flip side, you will have other people who go, whoa, this is way too variable. This is unpredictable. This is not safe. This is not secure. I need to be staying in this place and making sure nothing threatens this expression here, right? And that duality between both of those experiences, they're both a type of imbalance, because there's supposed to be this centeredness while we go through this state of change, right? And learning how to do that in your own life, let alone learning how to do that on a system level experience, right? I've been working with a team more and more in my business lately, which is so fun to have been grown to a level where we can have that and it's starting to feel right for that to be showing up. But it's a whole new process, because the way I run my business has always been very much in this fluctuating place. If you have followed me for a long time, or you followed me back on my other account, Emily Carolyn Baker, I was constantly shifting and changing how things were showing up. And a part of that was because I was following this pulse. And for me, I could see the constant stream through the center of it all. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the same no matter what I'm doing, whether I'm doing professional organizing or life coaching or energetics or stuff at the church. Like, the outside bit was fluctuating all the time, but this centerpiece was all the same. And it's really fun because my business is starting to reach this point where those two things are flipping, right? Where I'm getting to a place where I'm able to have more and more of a stable, singular external message that is being portrayed out there. And internally are those little shifts and expansions happening of how we're going about supporting and expressing this singular message there. Right? Most people go about by defining their business messaging first and then trying to figure out how to have this internal piece there. I've done my business the opposite, where I started by building that current and learning and getting familiar with it and letting it show me what was that centerpiece here. Right? What was that main thing I was going to do? And so it will be like, this is the direction. Oh, it's expanded and it's tweaked a little bit. And then it's tweaked a little bit here. And it's this beautiful, creative process, right? It's the emerging of this whole child. At first, it's like, I found a head. And it's like, oh, it's not just a head, there's a neck. And oh, it's not just a neck, there's a shoulder. And oh, it's not just a shoulder, there's a body emerging, right? There's this whole thing that's coming out and experiencing that. And it's fun to recognize and see this labor process that's happening for myself through the birth of this business, right? And so we see that pattern play out again in systems, this idea that there is this birth and death, this pattern of change, this we had this solid external definition to the world, and there was some, variable internally of how we moved through this. Right? And shifting to a new orientation where can we have this flexible place that can speak to anyone in any circumstance, in any place, in any part of the world, and have there still be this singular core within it, right? That is where I think we're headed. That is what I think our divine potential as a system, as an organization is to become, right? If you truly want to be a worldwide church, if you truly believe that you are the Church of Jesus Christ, that's what it has to be, right? It is not this rigid thing that we are trying to fit all the different fluctuations of different people inside. That's what's been happening for a while, right? And it was working for a bit, but that egg is cracking, it's hatching, it's falling apart, and that chick is emerging, right? And there's this fear that it's overtaking that singular sense of identity. And so who will we be if we lose that identity? It won't be the LDS Church. It won't be the Mormon Church anymore. Yeah, it won't. It will be the Church of Jesus Christ. And what that means, to me at least, is anywhere you find patterns, you find, in secular spirituality, they have a beautiful phrase called Christ consciousness, right? It's that recognizing. It might be a different word, it might be a different phrase, it might be a different practice, it might be a different perspective, it might be a different belief. But at the heart is this one singular Christ consciousness that is there. And it's so fun because throughout my whole life, I have always had this experience where it's like, ooh, I love studying other people, other cultures, other religions, even my science classes, my sociology classes. Oh my gosh, my systems and leadership class. Oh, so good. Throughout all of it, I would sit there and I'd go, that's the gospel. That's the gospel. That's the gospel. That's the gospel, right? And it was so fun because it was like seeing this pattern that I had learned, that I had grown up with, and recognizing, oh, it can be expressed that way. Oh, it can be expressed that way. Oh, it can be expressed that way, right? Sort of thinking of like a mammal, right? And it's like, oh, there are elephants, and oh, there are tigers, and oh, there are monkeys, and oh, there are humans, right? There are all these different expressions of these singular specific collection of traits, right? And so that process, that's what I feel like we're going through right now, is we've had this singular expression here, and then we've been trying to fit all the variations inside. And that singular outside external expression was like the shell on an egg. It's getting cracked, pieces are falling off, and there's this great fear. Like, I have so much compassion for what the leaders have to be going through, feeling like, oh, this is falling apart and it's happening on my watch. Not realizing, like, no, it's supposed to, because that's getting transformed, it's getting inverted. So then we can say, hey, any bit of truth and light and knowledge and goodness that supports the proper spiritual well-being of humanity, you belong. You have a place here. You fit. Bring your light, bring your truth, gather it all into one place. And that singular thing that will connect it all will be that Christ consciousness, that gospel of Jesus Christ, that blueprint. But it requires us to start seeing and understanding what that is in a new way, right? In a way that is this, again, like blueprint or metric, whereby we can say, yes, 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 these things fit. And we're used to viewing that by saying you have to believe the same, you have to think the same, you have to act the same, you have to do the same, right? That's the specific methodology, right? There's rapid eye therapy and there's cognitive behavioral therapy. They're both methodologies for helping support the proper mental development and well-being of a person. Right? There are fundamental tenets of what it means to be a good therapist, and understanding what those are. That's the metric, not everything has to look like cognitive behavioral psychology. Right? And so seeing this perspective of this death and rebirth and what that looks like and what that falling away is, and being able to separate the methodology from what I think is this divine potential, right? I do believe that part of the role of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is to be the Church of Jesus Christ that says, bring in all expressions, all aspects, all methodologies of what it means to recognize that you are a spiritual being having a human experience, and how to cultivate a personal relationship with God, the divine, in your day-to-day life. Let's gather those all together. Let's make them accessible to the world, right? Like a great spiritual internet of sorts, right? And that centerpiece will be that desire and that willingness to say, you are a spiritual being who is here to develop and to grow and to step into greater spiritual capacities, right? Within the LDS methodology, that means becoming like your heavenly parents and following your Savior, Jesus Christ, right? But that same expression can occur within the methodology of Kundalini Yoga, right? That idea that you are a spiritual being and that the way you move your body can interact with the way you move your spirit, and that you can have a personal connection and relationship with the divine through your body, through your movements, and how you experience it, that you can go stronger in that expression and in that ability, right? There's the core tenet there, right? And to see that all of those different components could be adding up as important parts of our spiritual development, right? I view a lot of the rites and ceremonies, baptism, going through the temple in the LDS Church as energetic activations, right? It's this idea that it is increasing your spiritual capacity, that you are literally able to hold, to be more of a spiritual being, right? It is like physically strengthening your body, but spiritually doing it, right? And to say, like, that's an important part of your spiritual progression, is to be able to have those activations and experience them. But I also sit here and I love Kundalini Yoga because I'm like, everyone should know and understand that there's this relationship between the physical part of you and the spiritual part of you, and you can learn how to operate that machinery in a whole new way, like learn how to properly drive your car, right? I love that idea and that concept, and I think it's an important one that people need to understand. Right? So starting to view it from this potential new possibility of stepping up in a whole new way. And part of the reason that I feel like there is this divine destiny of the church is because the fundamental doctrines that we have, I feel like, have space for it all, right? You can take the perspective that Joseph Smith, in a lot of ways, was collecting these different pieces and saying, you belong, and you belong, and you belong, and you belong, and here's how they all fit together. Right? And that we have the ability to, that was kind of spiritually born and birthed before. And this death process, death is always leading to the physical expression of what was first birthed, right? So it's birthed spiritually. It's not fully tangibly showing up. And then we go through this life experience that gives us momentum and practice and understanding. And then we go through the death experience that brings us to the point where we can actually diffuse, like solidify that into, embody it. That's the word I'm looking for. We can actually embody that and be the fullest expression of what was born. Right? And the misconception we have is that the life stage is when we have arrived, that we are the embodiment of that birth. We're not the embodiment during the life stage. During the life stage, we're growing, we're expanding, we're building up the possibilities, we're laying the foundation, we're gaining the momentum in order to round the corner into that death experience that's going to lead us into the actual embodiment taking place. Right? So cool to see play out. And it's so fun because, again, this pattern of birth, life, death, rebirth, birth, life, death, rebirth, right? However it ends up literally playing out, right? That's the unknown. That's the piece that we as humans, we as individuals get to co-create and see how is it going to unfold. But that pattern is a consistency. That pattern shows up, and there are certain indicators of it that we can learn to recognize in our individual lives, in our families, and in our larger systems. And when we can start recognizing those patterns and we learn how to move through them, and we learn how the key fundamental principles of how each one of those stages is part of our growth and development, so good. So good, right? Part of what's been so amazing in my relationship right now with my husband is getting to that point where when one of us starts feeling off, starts having a hard time, is struggling, it's no longer like, oh crap, what's gone wrong, right? It's this, oh, hey, something's coming up for you to process, for you to move through. You're growing, you're expanding right now. You're releasing old thought processes. You're releasing old emotional programmings, experiences, and you're stepping into a new way of being. And it creates the ability for each of us to hold space for each other, to allow us to move through those emotions, to experience the thoughts, the feelings, to get them out, and then to find that relief and satisfaction on the other side. And then it's back to things are great, right? Because you're in this positive place again. And it is so fun because for a while it was like, well, this is working in my life, but I don't know if it's just, me. And now I have been working for several years with so many amazing clients and getting to see the same thing happens with them. And they just keep amplifying the applications and the results that come out of it. And it becomes so cool to be able to start living your life and going, okay, things are uncomfortable right now, right? We're not getting rid of negative emotion. We're not getting rid of the bad experiences of life. I'm not saying this is like a Pollyanna experience where you're perfectly happy and wonderful all the time, but that actually kind of becomes accessible because the same way labor is sort of exciting and like transition can be this like, oh, I'm going to get to see my baby soon sort of moment, right? You start to see, okay, these things are happening. Yes, they're difficult. Yes, they're hard. Yes, they're triggering. Yes, they're whatever's going on. But this isn't the pain that's resulting from a broken leg, right? Pain that results from a broken leg means something is very wrong and needs to get fixed. And we need to pay attention to this, right? That's the pain alarm going off. Pain in labor, very different, right? Pain in labor is a sign of progression. There is purpose to it. It's not just your body picking on you. Those contractions are occurring for a purpose, for a reason. There is a pulse, a movement, a progression to them. And needing to understand, what does that look like in the life process, in the system process, right? That's where you get to this place where it's like, on the zoom in close-up focus, yes, things are hard. There's reality of difficult experiences, and that needs to be acknowledged, and people need to be supported in those. But in the zoomed out perspective, recognizing and seeing, there's a beautiful thing playing out here. And to me, that's the place where God's timing is found, right? Is that experience of, look how things are unfolding. Look at how things are progressing. Look at the movement that is occurring here, right? We can go on and on. The last example that I'll give here is, and then I'm still working on like some of the breakdowns of how these apply with like the talks that were given this last week. because I don't have all my notes and all my thoughts gathered. That's going to be coming this week. So if you're interested in those, stay tuned. I'm going to be doing more lives and like breaking down some of the talks specifically and pointing out like, hey, this is evidence of this part of the process. This is evidence of this part of the process, right? But one of the ones we've seen in the past that's taken place over a couple of general conference relates to Heavenly Mother and specifically with Renlund's talks, right? This is so fun because I know those talks had a lot of things in it that were really difficult for a lot of people. And I want to share this to show them as evidence of this pattern and process that is emerging, right? So part of what occurs is there's what I call a rise. A rise happens, and it's this expansion. We're stepping into new possibilities. This is the birth moment, right? And when the birth moment happens, the relationship between the masculine and feminine, and again, masculine and feminine, for those of you who are joining us now, is not talking about gender or personality or sexuality. They're two different energetic states, like positive and negative charge or north and south pole, right? And they go through this sort of interwoven dance that creates this pulse that we've been talking about all night long here, okay? And so when that rise happens, if it's the feminine that is rising, the first thing the masculine does is just sort of like, I'm not stopping you, right? He's not fully on board. He's not fully seeing all the things she is because he hasn't risen yet. He's still down here. She's the one who's coming up and rising. But he's moving along and he's just like, okay, you be up there. I'm going to hang out down here. Not necessarily going to stop you, right? Now, a lot of people are going to say Renlund's talk that was about Heavenly Mother was very much an attempt to stop, right? Now, it was an attempt to say, don't go here. But as far as going here, it was like, okay, we're not going to stop you at like the gospel topics essay. That's what we know. That's what we understand. That's good, right? So that's this progression. Now, when you've been going on your own individual journey for a while, it can feel frustrating when on the system level doesn't seem to be keeping pace with you. Right? But the system level is made up of the collective of all the humans involved in that. So there needs to be a lot of individual journeys that are taking place before that ever shows up on the system level. So the fact that it showed up on the system level, that in a worldwide general conference, that there were people on other parts of the world who didn't even know about the doctrine of Heavenly Mother yet, were hearing about it for the first time in general conference, was huge because it was an indicator that a significant enough of the individual population had gone through that journey that it was showing up there, right? It's this pulse and this beat. Now, fast forward a little bit, and we get another talk coming out that is talking about the importance of not speculating and the roles of personal revelation versus general direction, right? And this one maps in because now the feminine has been going here. Masculine, meanwhile, has been in this same state, hasn't risen yet. Right? Well, as they're moving along here, the feminine often wants to keep going. Right? She's like, this felt so good. I love this. Let's keep going. Right? But the masculine needs to be able to get up and join her. Right? And if she keeps trying to go, she's taking up the energy and the space for the masculine to be able to come and rise. So he can't. He's blocked. And what it does is it actually creates this divide between the two, separating them more and more. It causes more tension. It causes more struggle, right? See this play out a lot in relationships. And there will be this point where it's like, it feels like we're just really distant. Like we're not even really interacting with each other anymore. That's because you've really been expanding far here. And what I do when I'm working with a lot of my clients is helping them understand you have to go through a death process, which for the feminine is moving down into this other space. And what that does, when you move into that space, you create the room for the masculine to rise and actually come and join you where you were. But that death experience feels very threatening. It feels like going backwards for the feminine. It feels like she's losing all of that ground that she gained, all of that momentum, all of that past experience that she's going back in the box that she felt so hard to break out of. She's not, right? Again, that's that misunderstanding of the transformation that takes place during the death process. In the death process, what is occurring there is we are again becoming ready to step into and embody this on a whole new level, right? Whole new level and experience. And so making that death experience is important. Okay? And that statement coming up from the masculine was actually a masculine rise taking place, because it was saying, hey, feminine, don't get too far caught off. We want to come with you on this journey, right? And so there was a little bit of this death experience that happened. And for some, it was traumatic because the feminine was going this way and the masculine said, no, you don't. Right? That masculine rise kind of came and pushed things down. And that death was not a by choice experience. It felt very forced energetically, didn't feel good, didn't feel comfortable, right? Which creates this between the masculine and the feminine, right? So that's where we were kind of left in conference, and things continued to move forward. And it was like zero mention of even heavenly parents, right? That moving along can feel like, oh man, things have gone backwards. This is not good. Things are not occurring in the way we want to, right? But here's the thing. This is where I get excited. Death comes for the masculine too. The masculine drops down, and the way it dies is creating space for the feminine to embody, for it to be fully embraced. When the masculine moves into that experience, that's where he's saying, okay, I'm going to support you in this experience. I'm going to support you in this process happening here, right? So the fact that we've been journeying here is showing we are on track for a greater acceptance to occur, right? That's the energetic ribbon that's playing out here. Now it's uncomfortable right now being in this place where it's like, I don't think this is right, right? But it's, again, needing to understand this process, that rise is coming back, that death is occurring. And death, again, we as humans are not good at death. And so we usually go kicking and screaming into a death experience. And it can get kind of loud and extreme when that death is happening. And it's like, you're not going to take me down, right? But the energy is going to win out. Now, how that plays out, what the fallout is from that experience, that's up to us on the individual level, right? This could look like we just get back to talking about heavenly parents, right? This, though, could look like moving into saying Heavenly Father, Heavenly Mother in a greater capacity, right? Both options are equally available. They play out here, but a key part of this is being able to learn, how do you support the other in the death process? Because the more supportive you become in the death process, the more trust is built in that relationship. So when the rise happens, instead of viewing the opposite party as, I'm against you, I hate you, you caused this death, you put me in this experience, I don't like you, are wrong, so that then the next wave that comes along, they're just like, I want to rise up and get you back down, right? That's kind of the pattern we as humans are used to playing in. It's not useful. It's not productive. It just sort of creates this, you killed my family member, I'm going to kill your family member, like Dark Ages brutality escalation that happens. And what plays out is progress is limited, is inhibited, because every time we go through a round of the cycle, we're stuck having to recover from the trauma of the last one. We hardly have any capacity to actually be focused on where we're going, right? And so, again, learning to understand this process, learning how to navigate through it, that is what gives us the ability to have less trauma as we move throughout the experience. Because then, regardless of what the other party does, because we have no control over what other parties do, right? We only have that control of ourselves. We can stay in a state where we can see, the pattern is playing out. This is supportive of where I want to go. Things are continuing to unfold. And that allows us to have a less traumatic experience. And as a result, if we can take our less traumatized state and use it to support the other in navigating especially that death experience, right? I want you to imagine the death experience of a mother, right? Well, some of you are not going to have to imagine. Unfortunately, some of you have personally experienced this. And if that is the case, my heart goes out to you. I want you to imagine You are a woman in labor. Who you once were is dying. And you're being told there's this beautiful birth on the horizon, this wonderful thing waiting for you, this child is coming. And right now, all you can see and experience is the pain and the discomfort and the struggle that you are going through. And instead of having people around you, surrounding you, who are holding space for you as you move through that, who are encouraging you, who are helping you, who are saying, there's this good thing over here. You are safe. I am here for you. You can do this. Let's keep going. You have people who are attacking you, who are telling you everything's going wrong, who are saying, you need to be worried about this. You need to be worried about this. And you are just in this hyper traumatized reactive state. Yeah, that's not going to go over well, right? So for me personally, learning how to get into a place where I can say, yes, I understand you're dying, or yes, you're going through this like death process, right? And we need to be, paying attention so that we're aware of, baby's heart rate, your oxygen levels, right? So we can be aware of how to move through this in a safe way. We're not just throwing all caution to the wind, right? We still want to have some of that monitoring going on, but we're seeking to do it in a way that is supportive of the mother giving birth, right? Allowing her to move through this process to help her feel like she's having a comfortable experience through it. And in a system, well, in any relationship, right? Whether it's between the leadership system and the body part of the system, or it's between two individuals, right? The goal is for both parties to be able to do that for one another, right? To say, you're going through the death process. Let me hold this space for you, right? Sort of like I was describing earlier with me and my husband, recognizing those waves of emotion, of growth, of mental processing that we go through, right? And we do that together. We also have additional support things with friends and therapy and coaching and all sorts of support resources around us to help us work through those things. But we also do that for each other on our individual relationship. Right? Now, the capacity was not always there. There were times where I was not capable of holding that for him, and he was not capable of holding that for me. And so there were different times where sometimes one party or the other was carrying more of that weight. Right? Now, if the goal of the relationship becomes that one party is always carrying that and the other is not, that's imbalanced. Right? It's not okay. We want to be having both parties learning this skill. Right? But if there's a bit of this ebb and flow that's going on back and forth, that's natural. That's a part of learning how to hold that better and better for each other. And that's a part of that process, that dance that we're working through and working towards. And being able to see it instead of when you're holding all of it and they're not, instead of viewing it as, why can't they do this? What's going on? Acknowledging it's not accessible for them right now. It's available to them. And the goal and the standard we should be holding them to is to step into that because it is available. But in that singular moment, it might not be accessible. And that's okay because another day is going to come and another opportunity and another possibility for it to become more accessible. And that creates this rhythm back and forth. And in time, the ideal is that throughout this relationship, both parties become better able to hold that space for one another. Once you arrive in that relationship, that's when things get really good. Right? But again, understanding this from a spiritual development perspective is really, really important so that you can get clear on what are the different roles. What does that look like? How do I know when I'm supporting it, when I'm not? I think I might, but maybe I'm not actually, right? And what's beautiful about energetics, and again, some of these patterns and understanding this process that we move through, is it allows us this singular, like universal language to understand it so that we're not trying to do it through the context of belief. Belief doesn't have to play a role in it. We don't have to say we both agree on it at this level. We can drop down into this underpinning fundamental blueprint that is there and find common ground here. And then we can hold space for the variation up here, which is sort of what we were talking about earlier. If there's this space for the variation here, and underneath is that singular common understanding. Okay? So we've gone on talking about lots of topics for a long time, and if you were expecting breakdowns of talks, that's coming this week, right? So if you want to see different highlights on different talks and breaking it down from a spiritual development and an energetic perspective, we're going to be doing that more this week. So stick around for more lives, catch those replays. But in the meantime, if you are interested in learning more about the spiritual development process, if you want to understand this pattern, the cycle that we move through, how you move through it on an individual level, how you move through it in a spousal or partnership level, what it looks like in a family dynamic with things like parenting or interacting with your own parents, or what that looks like again on a system level. This is what I do. And right now I have a spiritual rebirth program that is opening up to help train those spiritual development experts, right? The same way we have therapists, we have doctors, we have counselors, right? To understand what goes into proper spiritual development. What does that look like? How do we distinguish it? How do we be able to have a standard that is underlying regardless of what the specific methodology is? That's what I help you learn. That's what I call becoming a wisdom bearer. Wisdom bearers are the keepers of spiritual knowledge. They are the seekers of spiritual truth and light. They are the speakers and defenders of that spiritual truth. And they are the midwives of spiritual death and rebirth. Once you understand this process, once you learn to move through this process, once you learn to practice and embody this process on your individual life, your ability to help others as they're navigating through it comes alive. Right? And there are so many people right now who I feel like are experiencing this in their own lives. They're not understanding what's going on. And so it becomes a much more difficult thing. And the natural sort of tendency of how to give ourselves relief and support and validation as we're moving through it is to just do that sorting process and say, this is wrong, 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 right? Again, that sorting process has a purpose. We want to identify those things. But then I see a lot of people getting caught with that and they go, great, I've collected and sorted through stuff and I know I don't want this, I do want this. Now what, right? This is where the professional organizer in me comes in, right? I come in and show you how to put your life back together, how to move back into your relationships, how to have that experience of being able to have that centeredness, that alignment that transcends your external experiences, where you no longer need people showing up in a certain way, saying a certain thing, believing, thinking, feeling the same way as you. You have a capacity to hold yourself here centered and let whatever else is playing out in the world around you and not let it rock you, right? That is true personal power. That is like a whole new level of security and stability in your life. And it comes through that process of finding that connection. Guess what? Through your experience as a spiritual being having a human experience and that personal relationship and connection with God and the divine. I show you a tangible, repeatable, predictable process of how to establish that alignment, apply it in your day-to-day life. And it is powerful. It is so amazing to see the results that show up in people's lives. The extremely difficult situations they are learning how to navigate with more peace, more ease, right? It may not be easy, but there is this sense of ease that flows through it, right? So the cool thing is, if you're interested in joining, I have a couple of different options for how you can do it now. It used to be that this was a 3-month-long program that you signed up for, and I taught, over a couple of weeks. I have changed that now so that there are 2 different options of how you can go through it. You can choose to do it in the month-to-month option through my monthly membership program. This gives the availability for you to be able to join and start accessing this information on a lower financial and time commitment, right? You can commit to just 1 month at a time, and you can pick your tier of how much access you want to what we're doing. If you choose the highest tier of my monthly membership, you also get access to the full spiritual rebirth program, right? Now, the full Spiritual Rebirth program runs for a year long. And the reason for this is because there are 4 different stages in this birth, life, death, rebirth process. And we take a quarter of a year as we move through each one. That's part of this natural cycle that we have as human beings. And so I found it's a good period of time. And it was fascinating because I found that most of my clients ended up working with me for about a year. We would get through one cycle and then they'd re-up and do it again, and they'd re-up and they'd re-up, right? And I finally realized, you know what? I want to design a whole program that fosters this whole journey in one capacity. So you learn about each stage in this process, and you learn as well about what proper spiritual development looks like. And as being a part of that, completing the whole year-long process, you also have the opportunity to become certified as a wisdom bearer, right? Which means you understand the basic tenets of what goes into proper spiritual development. You have learned how to practice them in your own lives, and you know how to help foster and support others in their own journey. It's like life coaching meets personal spiritual development meets pastoral training, all wrapped up in one. And the cool thing is, you can get access for the full year-long program for the same price as my 12-week program. It comes down to being about $36 per session. It's an incredible investment. It is the greatest gift you could give to yourself, to your family, to your community, because this is the fundamental skill, right? The foundation of all of our relationships comes back to our proper spiritual development. And everything in life is a relationship. So if you learn how to navigate proper spiritual development, you learn how to navigate relationship. And when you learn how to navigate relationship, you learn how to navigate life. It's beautiful. So if you are interested in wanting to join, there's a couple of different ways. You can head to the link in my bio. You can join up for the membership right away, start getting access. Start joining us I do weekly workshops where I teach you and we practice some of these materials, and it's applying these basic fundamental skill set of learning how to be in alignment. Or you can come join us for the full year-long program. It's amazing. We have breaks in between. It's sort of like signing up for a year of school, right? But in a way that is going to impact you, oh man, so powerfully. Okay? So if you're interested, again, you can join the full year program by doing the top tier of my membership, or you can pay for it all in full. You get a discount if you do it that way. It's an awesome route. If you have questions, if you want to explore working together, if you just want to learn more about what the spiritual rebirth process and program looks like, you can book a consult. Again, the link is in my bio, and we can chat about helping you become a wisdom bearer and learning how to better navigate your own spiritual death and rebirth process. And it would be my honor to get to be a midwife for you in your journey. It's a beautiful thing. Death is amazing. It comes for us all, not just once, but many times throughout our lives. And when we are able to greet it like a dear friend, to know how to move through it, to know how to navigate with it, the rebirth opportunities, they're so good. So we'll wrap up that with us tonight. Again, if you want more information, head to the link in my bios, comment below. We'll get you signed up. It's going to be so good. And in the meantime, stay tuned. We've got the after party happening tomorrow night. If you want the Zoom link to come join us, just register in my bio for that. Whether you attended all, none, or some of General Conference, come chat, share your thoughts, share your experiences, process, discuss. It's always a fun time. And then stay tuned this week as we're going to be doing more lives breaking down the talks. I'm going to be sharing lots of content helping you understand more about what the spiritual development process is and why it's important. Till then, have a wonderful rest of the night. Take care. And over here on YouTube, we are ending things for you. Again, apologize for there not being any video here. It's been quite interesting trying to get that to work. But if you listen to this, appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed this sort of podcast here. Have a wonderful rest of the night.